Good morning. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Larry Cebula. He is an assistant digital archivist for the Washington State Archives and is a professor in the history department at Eastern Washington University, where he directs their public history program. Prior to Eastern Washington, he was a tenured professor at Missouri Southern State University. He did his schooling at the University of Chicago, at Eastern Washington, and at the College of William and Mary. He's published books and articles and reviews in Native American history, Pacific Northwest history, digital and public history as well. His blog, Northwest History, won the Cleopatra Award in 2008 for Best Individually Authored History Blog. His digital project, called Spokane Historical, a smartphone app and website for local history, has won awards and received almost 1 million views since 2013. That's unbelievable. Not because it's not a good website, that's a lot of hits. I personally would need to offer thanks to Dr. Cebula for answering my many questions, providing some excellent advice and tips, as at the Red Center I launched our own digital public history app and website, Intermountain Histories, which is built on the same platform as his Spokane Historical, and he was very helpful as we were trying to figure out how to launch this project and get it going. His talk today is entitled, "But Will It Count for Tenure? Explorations in Public and Digital History." For students here who are interested in finding out more about career options or finding out more about public history and digital history, we'll be back here in the same room at 3 o'clock this afternoon for kind of an informal, relaxed Q&A session with Dr. Cebula, where you can pick his brain, ask him questions, just whatever you want to know about public history. He'll be here to kind of have an informal discussion with us at 3 o'clock. So please join us then if you can. So join me in welcoming Dr. Cebula.
Well, thank you, Brendan, and thank you for everybody who showed up today. I'm going to wander back and forth from the microphone. I'm just a walker as I present. When Dr. Rensink asked me to come here and present, he said, I want you to talk about what you do and some of your adventures in public history. And I was of two minds. The first part of my mind says, talking about myself. Yes, that's my favorite. The other part was less a little arrogant even for me. So I'm going to try and put a kind of a wrapper around it. Talk about public and digital history. Talk about the moment that we're in, this amazing historic moment. For good and for bad, as we turn on the news every day, and then how digital history and public history can shape some of that. The format is going to be, I'll talk a little bit about the digital turn, about the state of the historical profession, everything is broken, then about public and digital history, and bring it back around to will it count for tenure. I want to leave a lot of time for questions or complaints or protests about what I say. But I also know a lot of you have a class to go to at noon, so I'll try to bring my portion to an end. Then we'll pause, and if you need to leave, or if you want to pretend that you need to leave, you can do that, and I'll proceed from there. Well, first let's talk about the digital turn. A friend of mine who does digital history says the introduction of the internet is as great a revolution in human history as the invention of the printing press. And I think that's absolutely true. It may understate it, if anything. But revolutions aren't all for the good. Here's one example of how the internet kind of brings the world together, brought the world together. And, historians, we always want to have our citations. This is an example I'm actually lifting. It's not original from me, from an article by Roy Rosenzweig that appeared a few years ago in the American Historical Review. Well, a lot of you are too young to remember 9/11, or it's just a weird childhood memory of the day your parents were upset. But I'm older than your parents, and it was a very upsetting day. Of course, there were attacks on the Twin Towers. There was the attacks on the Pentagon. Thousands of lives lost. But a lot of us in the United States, what we were most shocked by, we weren't shocked by terrorism. The scale of it was amazing. But we were shocked by the reaction in some parts of the world. Not the majority of people, and even in these countries, but in places like Pakistan and some other places, and Bangladesh, some people came out to the streets to celebrate 9/11. And we'd turn on the evening news, we'd see this, and we'd see pictures in the New York Times, and oh my God, a lot of Americans didn't realize how much parts of the world hate us and for what reasons that they hate us. So we're looking at these pictures, and we're sharing them on the internet and stuff, and somebody saw something a little unusual. One of these pictures. Anybody see it? What doesn't belong here? Let's do it. Here's this poster of Osama. Here's a close-up. Who's that? Bert. Bert! What the hell, Bert? Look at him. How did Bert end up on this? And so, there's all these internet message boards, which was a pretty new thing in 2001. And everybody's saying, what's going on here? It must be faked. It must be Photoshopped. No, here's some other pictures of the protests from a different angle. And if you look close, there's Bert also. Bert's got some splaining to do. So it's discussed in the news, Osama, Bert Laden, Fox News with their usual clever take on things, bin Laden's felt-skin henchmen, and so on. How did this happen? Well, the answer, of course, lies, and you're probably getting this in your head. The answer lies, of course, it happens with the internet. About the mid-1990s, most of us of my generation got our first personal computer. And where we got it was at work. A personal computer in those days was $3,000, $5,000. It wasn't something you had in your home for the most part. But it was sold, and this seems kind of ironic today, it was sold to employers as a workplace productivity thing that would enhance the productivity of your workers to put a personal computer on their desk. What are they going to do with it? Oh, we'll figure it out. Email. Let's get them on there. So we all have personal computers on our desks at work. Now, what's the one thing you don't want to do at work? Work, yeah. Absolutely. So we start, seeing what we can do, and there's solitaire. And that wasn't all that compelling. In 1994, Netscape's Mosaic browser came out. This was the first graphical user interface browser to sort of look around the internet without having to be a geek, or you could click and point and you could explore the internet. Well, there wasn't a lot to see on the internet, so it was kind of disappointing, and there was still work to do. But increasingly, there were these viral websites, and there were very few of them, and we trade them via emails, and they go around. There were no good search engines at the time. One of the first viral websites is this one. Okay, sorry about that. There we go. I've broken this. I'm not sure what I've done here, and our IT person told me he couldn't be here for the presentation. Let me figure this out. That's not it. There we go. Bert is evil. This is the work of Ignio Palacio. He was a Filipino web designer and immigrant to this country who worked in Silicon Valley. And it's kind of leveraging two brand new technologies in the 1990s. One was the internet and Mosaic and Netscape. The other was something called Photoshop. That was brand new, and it's something that depended heavily on the personal computer. It was a powerful set of tools that enabled you to alter photographs, including historic photographs, and you could juxtapose people who were never together. I grew up believing pictures were always true. Probably none of you believe that, photographs. And the reason you don't is because you know about Photoshop. So Ignacio Palacio would take pictures of Bert and do things like this. This is a mugshot of Bert from San Francisco police. He'd share it with his friends, and they go, "That's very funny." And pretty soon, other people started messing around with Bert and put him in all kinds of compromising positions. So here's Bert with Adolf Hitler. Here's Bert at the JFK assassination, and implying he's a mysterious second gunman. And just Bert doing all kinds of things that a Muppet ought to do. And there was also this picture on the website. Osama bin Laden was known to Americans before 9/11, though not as he would be. There was an earlier attempt to take down the World Trade Center with a truck bomb. There was an attack on a U.S. warship called the USS Cole. He is among America's most wanted. So here's Bert palling around with Osama. And you can see it's exactly the picture they took for that poster. When people realized this, they tracked down the poster maker in Pakistan, got this kind of broken English email back from him, probably a Google Translate thing. But we downloaded the above picture from bin Laden's website. We didn't know meaning of pictures, so it was our mistake. We just delete that picture from the poster after we know and inform. Thanking you, Azad Products. There. Google image search is probably how they got there. So we're in this new world. We're in this new world of the internet and digital resources and digital information, and it's linking us in ways we can't expect. As Americans, when we talk about revolution, we always use revolution as a good thing. But historically, most revolutions are anything but a good thing for many of the people involved. It's part of our great national privilege that we can look at it that way. We are in the middle of a revolution. And we're also in the middle of a period of great stress for the historical profession. This is a picture I wanted to use, and Brendan said I couldn't unless I altered it some. But it's from the Occupy protests. If you remember those from a few years ago, protesting sort of global economic equality. What it says is everything is broken, and indeed it is, and that's true in history as well. A few examples of that. We were just talking about this before the break. There's been basically an almost complete collapse of the job market for history PhDs. Nobody's hiring them. But on the other hand, PhD programs continue to produce them. The green is the number of jobs. The yellow is the number of new PhDs each year. And this, if anything, makes the situation look much better than it is, because in fact, people who didn't get a job last year but got a PhD are also still in the market, and from the year before. At an institution like mine, a secular institution where anybody can apply for a job, we get 300, 400, 500 applications when we offer a professorship. The good news is we haven't offered one for years, and we probably won't. When people retire, they're not replaced. Why not? Because there's a drop-off in humanities majors. Since the Great Recession of 2008, many students your age have taken what they consider a more practical approach to education. I would argue it isn't, but history majors are getting fewer and fewer. That's a shame. Businesses are calling out for history majors. You've not made a mistake by majoring in history. When you go home for Thanksgiving, your parents tell you to change their major to business. They're making the mistake. You're going to be fine. But with falling numbers of majors, there's falling numbers of jobs. But it's not just that that's broken. I would say that the way we transmit information as scholars to the world is also fundamentally broken. The title of my talk was Will It Count for Tenure? And you guys probably have only a vague awareness of what tenure is. But basically, it's a job guarantee you get in return for doing certain things. The hardest part of those things to do is publishing. You need to publish peer-reviewed journal articles or books in these scholarly formats. And that's the coin of the realm, is usually the answer. Well, that's the coin of the realm. And I'd argue it's like Bitcoin. It's artificial and inflated and acceptable in only very few circles. This was a study in 2007 suggesting 90% of papers published in academic journals are never cited, and half the papers that are published in academic journals are never read by anybody but the author and the editors. This is controversial. There's some back and forth, but nobody's arguing they're completely off on the deep end. And even if something is published, if I publish an article tomorrow in the Western Historical Quarterly or another academic journal like that, and you said, great, I want to read that, can you send it to me? Well, I probably could, but the legally correct answer is no, you have to either join the organization that prints the journal, or you have to go to the library and read it. Eventually, it'll appear online. There's a paywall is it 3 years for the Western Historical Quarterly before things appear in JSTOR? Does anybody here know? It's either three or 5 years. Eventually, it'll appear on JSTOR. Then everybody can access it? Hell no. It's a subscription database. You only have access if you're part of that 1% of humanity, or probably less, that is affiliated with a university somewhere in the Western world that has access to JSTOR. JSTOR turns away, and this is a few years old, 150 million attempts to access their information every year. It'll show up in your Google search, you click on it, you can't get there. You hit a paywall. Publishing an academic journal article, I would submit, is like taking 6 months of your life and burying it in a hole in the ground on a dark night somewhere out in the forest. And increasingly, and whatever's wrong with history is just a little sliver of what's wrong kind of with the greater society. Increasingly, parts of the American public, and we'll say it, the Republican parts, distrust universities entirely. This year, for the first time, a majority of self-identified Republicans thinking university education is a bad thing. And it's against this backdrop of well, you guys know what a hard economic climate you're going out into. I don't have to tell you that. My generation has left you guys a smaller set of opportunities than we ourselves enjoyed. So on that cheery note, let's talk about public history a little bit. A lot of you are studying history, and history, again, it's a great preparation for all sorts of careers, but some of you want to actually do history when you graduate. You've heard about this dismal academic job market, you're not quite sure. Well, there's something called public history. How many of you have heard the term public history? Curious. That's up quite a bit from a few years ago. Mostly people didn't know what it was a few years ago. There's kind of different definitions, and public historians argue about it, which is a boring argument to me. Let me feature a couple. Kathy Corbett and Dick Miller of the National Council on Public History said it's a movement, a methodology, and approach. Promotes the collaborative study. The collaborative is different from academic history. Academic historical works are almost always single-authored, sometimes a couple of people. Public history is often a project involving multiple players and people in the community. It's collaborative. It's also history that's available to the public. So it's not something that's published behind a JSTOR paywall, but something that's out there. Another definition of public history, the one I prefer, is kind of the jobs definition. Employment of historians in history-related work outside of the academy. So it's working in all kinds of places. I'll get to that in a minute. The state of public history, for a long time, public history was kind of the redheaded stepchild of the historical profession. A famous Western historian took one of his students aside when she expressed an interest in public history and said, well, if you really think you can't cut it, I guess that's a good way to go for you. This person went on to be one of the most respected, well, it wasn't one of your professors. This person, a friend of mine, went on to become one of the most respected public historians in the country. But you don't hear that kind of thing so much anymore. With the collapse of the academic job market, most professors are happy if their students can get history-related jobs. So there's been slow, but pretty solid at this point acceptance from academic historians. We have a national conference, the National Council of Public History. We have a journal, which is behind the JSTOR paywall. But other than that, we're doing pretty well. You can think of public history as a set of skills, and a lot of these skills are going to be familiar with you. Archival research, historiography, these are things you're doing already. Some of them are kind of particular. A lot of public history jobs, like in historic preservation, involve local history, being able to do that kind of fine-grained local historical research. Most people are more interested in the history immediately around them than they are in the American Revolution. Writing and editing, you're very familiar with writing as history students. Public history writing, though, tends to be different, shorter, punchier. Try to tell a story on a museum label. There's a writing challenge for you. Visual displays of all sorts, whether it's a roadside sign or a website or a million other things, a museum display. And digital competence, in almost every field of public history. Public historians work all over the place. And again, think about the definition I prefer. It's doing history work that's not standing in front of a classroom boring people. So anything that involves historical work that isn't teaching is public history, I would argue, and most public historians would argue. Museums are the first thing that pops to mind. There's thousands of jobs in museums across the country. They all pay $20,000 a year. That's not true. There's some great museum jobs in the country, but it's a tough field. Historic societies employ people. Archives, and archivists are often called records managers. Lots of jobs, government employs lots of them, professional salaries, professional benefits. Historic parks, the National Park Service employs hundreds of historians. They're often called interpreters rather than historians, but they're doing historical work. Government agencies, the military. Most military bases have a couple of unit historians. These people are not always military or former military. Increasingly, they're civilians with historical training. Big corporations employ not only archivists, but people to tell the history of the corporation. It's kind of a sales kind of thing. Google and Apple employ dozens of historians. There's a lot of historical consulting, whether it's putting together historic register nominations or working for a law office. So much law is based on precedent. So there's just an awful lot public historians do. And even within some of those fields, like at museums, here's a guy wearing ye old clothing at Colonial Williamsburg, where I got my PhD. Even within a museum, you might be an interpreter. You might be the person who creates exhibits. You might manage the physical collections. You might manage the archives, which is often a separate job. You might do educational programming, because educational outreach is a big part of nearly any museum. You might be a researcher who works there. So there's multiple jobs, multiple subcategories within these categories. And I could break this out for any of them, government and so on. Historic sites and national parks. I've had good luck in recent years placing some of my graduate students with the National Park Service. It's a tough row to hoe. There's something called veterans preference. And if you're not a veteran, getting into the Park Service full-time involves first taking, for several years, a series of seasonal jobs and moving around. National parks, a lot of them are historic sites. They're called cannonball parks within the Park Service. Gettysburg, Yorktown, a lot of these places back east. But there's historic sites, of course, in the West as well. Those often focus on westward expansion or battles. Sometimes famous Americans' presidential birthplaces and that kind of thing. And they're all over. And my point with Park Service work is you end up moving around quite a bit. The way you get onto the full-time in the first place is moving around. The way you move up is moving around. It's a real burden on some people. Other people consider it a delightful adventure. But you need to be aware of the mobility. Digital and public history. Again, in almost any of these fields, the museum or the government or whatever, if you're the youngest person there, you're in charge of the social media. You're in charge of building us a website. You need to know how to do that sorts of things. Well, to bring it back around to some of my experiences in local history, my first in digital and public history, my first job in this profession was at Missouri Southern State University in Joplin, Missouri. A little school, about 5,000 people. One of my colleagues proudly said it's the Harvard and Yale combined of Jasper County, Missouri. And so it was. Very few resources. We had a president who considered, above all, the worst use of money was to buy books for the library. Because he pointed out most students never go to the library. They never check out a book. What a waste of money. And so he kept the library on a starvation diet. I got my first job there in 1996. I moved into my office. I walked over to the library to look at what books there were available to assign to my students for their research, and it was grim. And I thought, okay, well, this is and I also thought about how can I do research here? And the answer was you can't. And I thought, okay, this is a good job. I'll buy a cemetery plot in town and settle in for 40 years. Then in 2003, 2004, something called Google Books popped up. Google can do this. They're rich. They decided to go in on kind of a lark, go into some of the leading libraries in the United States, scan all the books, put them online in a website. And they did it. And then a bunch of the copyright holders said, wait a minute. And so they had to take down a lot of the stuff that was under copyright. The practical effect of that is that virtually every book published in the United States before 1923, when copyright kicks in, was online and at my fingertips in my cinder block office in Joplin, Missouri. And it just dropped on me one day. And I started exploring it, and I swear tears came to my eyes. I can do research again. I'm back in the game. And all these other websites started popping up, and all these other digital databases, and all these other ways to do research. And I started thinking about my great love of Northwest history and how can I explore Northwest history with some of these new resources. And I'd get ideas, and I'd want to share the ideas. So I started a blog called Northwest History in 2007. And this proved to be a turning point in my career in a way I didn't anticipate. What I did with that blog mostly was explored resources. Hey, here's something new. Here's some cool things about it. Here's some cool things about Northwest history. Here's the links to it. Good luck. I'd also do other things, though. I'd explore new digital. The internet brings up new possibilities. One of them, this was a post that went kind of semi-viral. It's had a couple tens of thousands of reads. The Library of Congress, Flickr and the Limits of Crowdsourcing. The Library of Congress was digitizing all these photographs, but they didn't know who was in them. They didn't always know where they were. It was just a collection of photographs. Maybe if we put these online, the public knows something. So they put them all online. It got a lot of publicity. They put them in a website called Flickr. A lot of you probably know that, where you can like comment on things. And they say, what does the public know? It turned out the public didn't really know much. So I kind of blogged about this. This was the name of the post was, this was the first comment that somebody had on the first picture. They kind of highlighted the woman's forehead. And this was a woman writing and wrote "lick this," which is not really useful. Exploring digital databases to see how far west did veterans of the American Revolution go by exploring where their headstones and graves are, and that was kind of interesting. And my one blog post that did go genuinely viral. It's had about at least 500,000 views at this point. Open letter to my students: no, you cannot be a professor. Trying to lay out the reality of the academic job market. Because the thing is about a student who really wants to be a professor, you can talk to them all day, and 90% of what you say is don't do it. If you hold out a little thread of hope, that's all they hear. And they go out of your office saying, Professor Cebula says I can be a professor. Well, no, that's not what I said. So I wanted to present the no hope view of it, and that's what I did, and this got kicked around the internet quite a bit. So increasingly, I'm doing this stuff and I'm wanting to bring it into the classroom. How can I train students in this digital age? I came to, and I got a new job out of this deal. I thought I was going to, I had my cemetery plot there in Joplin, but a job opened up at Eastern Washington University directing public history and being half-time in the Washington State Digital Archives. So they advertised for somebody who has 1 foot in the historical world and 1 foot in the digital. And I wasn't all that deep in the digital, but nobody was in 2008 when I applied for this job, or very few historians were. So I got it. There was a certain moment, kind of narrow window that I was able to jump through. And so for the first few years, I did various kind of grab bag things, trying to teach students in my traditional history classes and also in my public history classes to embrace some digital methods. And they came up with some pretty cool stuff. That map is a woman who found 3 different diaries of women on the Oregon Trail. She digitized the diaries, and she geolocated each of their diary entries along the Oregon Trail using Google Maps. And you can sort of click through and read the entries on each day. Well, that was a pretty neat project. Then she graduated. Nothing ever happened to it again because she graduated. Another student went through a neighborhood called Hilliard and he found a collection of old photographs of the Hilliard neighborhood and did kind of before and after photographs and put up a blog. And that was fun. And he graduated. Nothing ever happened to that. Another student went around through the community and interviewed public history professionals and put together a website with interviews about what their days were like. It's all very good stuff. It didn't add up to anything. I was looking for one project my students could contribute to year after year, and it could grow. And that's when I hit upon Spokane Historical. This is not quite my invention. It works on a platform called CurateScape that was invented in Cleveland, but we are the first place to adopt it after Cleveland. And it's this. How many of you are familiar with the Rocky Mountain Histories project that's coming here out of BYU? That's the right name of it, isn't it?
Intermountain.
Intermountain Histories. Just a few of you. It's a smartphone app and a website for local history. It's geolocated stories. You just sort of jump ahead. So you see these little dots. This is what we looked like when we first came out. Each of these is a place where one of my students told a story about a historic building, about an Indian encampment, about something like that, and built out the stories from there. So we launched with relatively few stories. Now here's where I see if I can switch into the web without breaking everything. Let's see. There we go. So we launched in 2011 with 30 stories. You can see now we have to use heat maps instead of pins because it cover the whole downtown. We're up to over 500 stories of local and regional history. And with the smartphone app version, if you were standing in Spokane, there'd be a little blue dot here And the blue dot would be you, so you can see what historic sites are right around you. And this proved to be the perfect sort of thing for students to work on. I have like a Google document, I give them a list of interesting stories that haven't been told in my region, but I also say, if you have something of your own, go ahead and tell it. They pick stuff off these. So here's one of my students, Lee Nielsen, a few years ago. He says, well, the Washington Street Bridge, okay, I'll do that. And he wasn't very enthusiastic about it. He goes, history of a bridge, this is going to be thrilling. But bridges are one of the basic human constructs for navigating the environment. And a lot of history ends up happening around them. So he wrote a history of it. I talked about compact public history writing, and this is an example of how difficult that can be, sort of 3 or 5 paragraphs about what's interesting about the site. He found some historic photographs of it. The thing about bridges is they're built by governments, and the thing about governments is governments often document what they do. So I kind of love this picture for the layers here, because this is from 1900 something. And you see the old bridge, which they just kind of broken and shoved downstream a bit, and they'll let the spring floods take it from there. That's the old style way of doing this. You see the electricity probably just going in Spokane. You see the railway. There's still the horse and wagon, but there would have been automobiles by this time as well. So that's kind of interesting. He also found a couple of other things. He found this weird little newspaper article about an attempted robbery on the bridge. And he goes, well, it's not that historically significant, but it's kind of a funny story. What should I do with that? Well, the nice thing about this platform is it also supports audio and video. So in my classes, instead of just writing stories, students also produce podcasts instead of papers, and they produce short videos instead of papers sometimes. So here's what he did with this little newspaper article. I should say this student was a great ham. He was kind of a frustrated actor.
2 robbers used poor judgment. Frank Billette, West 437 Maxwell, turned the tables on 2 would-be strong-arm robbers, police reported yesterday. He told officers the 2 men grabbed him on the Washington Street Bridge Saturday night. He said he jerked away from the men, picked up one of them, and tossed him in the river. Billette said the other man fled, and he told police he last saw the other man swimming for shore. Spokane Daily Chronicle News Team, August 1st, 1960.
Notice how he worked the citation into the end. That's a historian for you. He also found something else unusual that happened at the Washington Street Bridge that was unexpected. There's the map. Let me go up here. How many of you know who Harry Houdini was? That's pretty good, 100 years after his death. Well, then with no further ado, I'll show you. Houdini, it turns out, came to Spokane.
In 1910, a group of Spokane businesses offered Harry Houdini an undisclosed cash sum to perform one of his daring magic tricks on the Washington Street Bridge. As seen here in this 1907 footage of the same trick performed in Rochester, New York, Houdini had chains placed around his legs and his hands put in handcuffs before plummeting to the waters below. Houdini reportedly sunk deep into the freezing waters for a moment before triumphantly arising to the surface unchained. Spokane businesses had an extra reason to celebrate, as the throngs of onlookers escaped the cold by ducking into the sponsoring downtown shops.
That's Lee Nielsen's work. So this really transformed my teaching, having this site, and increasingly it became the focus of some of my classes, was producing stories for Spokane Historical. Often we work with trying to multitask here, and as I often tell my students, there's really no such thing as multitasking. There's only not paying attention. There we go. I don't think that's the one I want. Okay, we'll do it your way. And what I love about this is I'm not abandoning traditional history at all. Students, to do good digital history, you have to first of all do good history. And this is why so much digital history is bad. The thing that runs through bad digital history is bad history. So traditional public history, historical research. The stories in Spokane Historical are built on historic register nominations and census records and Sanborn maps and all the sorts of things that your professor's been making students do from time immemorial. There's also all of these new digital resources you can use, things like Google Books and some of the knockoffs of that now, HathiTrust and archive.org. YouTube sometimes has amazing historical footage of your local community. Somebody digitized their home movies of the parade in 1950 and put them up. There's tremendous resources. Public history skills, concise storytelling, not going on and on. I think a lot of bad writing begins in high school where your teacher gives you a word count. Write me 500 words about this, and you write something and it's got 250 words. You start putting in the adjectives to stretch it out. Public history writing doesn't permit of that. Digital historical skills, not just doing digital research, but then being able to present digitally. Something as simple as editing a photo and cropping and resizing it so it loads on your smartphone without taking half an hour. Making a video and compressing a video, making a podcast. These are great things to know. It's a place for work in a variety of classes. And sometimes the stories the students uncover are amazing. Somebody came back from the cemetery with this picture going, there's a Japanese section of the cemetery. Did you know that, Professor? And I took this picture. What can it be? And obviously there's a story here, but neither the student nor I could read it. Turns out one of the guys I worked with in digital archives, his wife is from Japan and studied 19th century Japanese literature and is able to read this is an obsolete form of kanji. And it's the story of this guy, Tadahiro Muramatsu, and how he is from a farm family and how he enjoyed drinking and reading poems when he was drunk. That's really what it says. And it's how his son built this tomb in 1919. We did some other research on this guy. There's a whole life story there. So I showed you Spokane Historical. It's had a huge impact. The other thing about doing history in public like this is it's not open just to a couple hundred people who might have JSTOR access. It's open to the world. And the thing about doing local history is people in your community are interested. For years, I lived in southwest Missouri, and I researched the history of the Pacific Northwest, and my neighbors weren't particularly interested in what I did. Now I live in Spokane, and I do the research the history of Spokane, and that's why the website gets so many hits. And it builds connections, so it's constantly in the newspaper. Every week, if the newspaper reporters are working on something historical, I get a text message or an email from somebody, and sometimes the stories are about the project or about my students. So often the project itself is in the local paper, 5 apps that every Spokaneite needs, and there we are. It also gives the students opportunity to present their research in other ways than just the digital. They go to conferences, I'm sure your campus has something like an undergraduate research conference. The story you do on a website like this can make a really good poster without a lot of effort. You've got the graphics already, you've got a pretty concise story. In presenting at conferences. It's very important to me that all the students' names are there in Create Escape Project. You get credit for there. Because after all, you're going to graduate, you're going to apply for jobs, you're going to send your resume off to people. The people are going to look at your resume going, yeah, it meets the minimum qualifications, maybe. What's the next thing they're going to do? They're not going to call your references next. They're going to do something simpler. What are they going to do? They're going to Google you. You've got to be in front of your Google search results. This kind of project, Google likes this kind of project. It shows up high in your search results. It kind of, the joke I usually made at my institution is this will drive down that DUI you got in your search results. This may be a joke that doesn't translate very well to this, or does it? Anyway. And it reaches a lot of people. I just went over my Google Analytics the other day. This is just a typical month in the life of Spokane Historical, about 8,000 views a month. That's not big as the internet goes, but compares really well to the sales of my book. So I feel like I'm reaching some people this way. And the impact of the analytics, the page views, this is just the web version. This is not counting the app, which is getting recently about as many views as the website. So we're way over 1 million views of this project. And who we're reaching. This is the part, I only discovered this last night. I was so thrilled. Who we're reaching. The Google Analytics also break it down by age. A constant complaint in the historical community. I go to the historic preservation meetings in my town, and we joke about it. Is this an AARP meeting or is this historic preservation? I'm the youngest guy there a lot of times. But it's not that young people aren't interested in history. They aren't interested in the way people my age have traditionally done it. And I've got the statistics to prove it right here. Half of our more than 60% of our users are under 35 years of age. And here's an award we won for historic preservation education last year. And my student, the guy who did Houdini jumping from the bridge, that's him. He cleaned up pretty well. I used to have to send him home sometimes for showing up at the archives. He had an internship at the archives, and he'd show up in shorts and a shirt that had never been ironed. I go, no, it's a professional thing. Go home. But you can see he graduated in 2013 from Eastern Washington University, not Harvard or Yale or Brown. Here he is at work last fall. He's briefing his boss. Anybody recognize the hair? Who is that? John Kerry, the Secretary of State as of last fall. And my student continues to work at the State Department. He text messaged me this morning from Slovenia, where he is conducting training of the U.S. Embassy staff in social media. 2013, graduated. So it's had a wonderful, wonderful impact. Most Google searches for local history show up on my door, and I get emails every single day from people wanting to donate something to they think I'm the Historical Society. I've got to tweak the website to make that more clear. People say, I've got my grandma's diary. Would you like to buy it for the Historical Society? Well, no, but here's who it is. Where are the ghosts in Spokane? Oh, there aren't any, because there's no such thing. I got an email yesterday saying, I want to reserve this historic building for my wedding. Please respond immediately. That's how I do it. And I was very polite. That's not who I am. Good luck with that. But when you start doing things on the web, things change. And this sort of brings us back to the very beginning with Bert. It makes connections you could never expect. Some lessons I've learned along the way. Not everything students do ends up published. It's a big job editing it, making it ready for the web, and some of it's just too far off, and it never does get out there. Audio and video are a big lift for students trained how to research and write and do footnotes to say how to do a podcast. You can all do it. You can all do it, but it's a skill. It won't come effortlessly. Promoting the site. On my to-do list for the last 5 years has been getting window cling stickers printed up and putting them all over downtown Spokane businesses to make people more aware. Still haven't done it. It's another job. A few do-nots along the way when you're doing digital history. Don't just repeat the error, and I'm almost done here. Don't just repeat the errors of the past. A lot of the historic signs you see put up in previous times, a lot of the monuments are racist, are wrong, are dumb. Don't just repeat what other people have done. Take a fresh approach. But will it count for tenure? Will this new coin from this new realm, this digital realm, will it apply to the academic realm, and will it count for tenure? No. No, it won't. The academy is one of 3 medieval institutions that still exist. The Catholic Church, the university. What's the third medieval institution? Maybe it's just the two of us. Change is very slow. I was promoted to full on the basis of Spokane Historical. That's a very unusual situation. For the most part, your professors will continue to work as they always have, but that doesn't mean that you have to. That's what I want to emphasize. If you don't have a blog right now, go and get one. Be careful what you post there. If you don't have a digital professional presence, it's time to start. If it's as simple as a LinkedIn page, go ahead and do that. Yeah. And that concludes what I have to say. Thank you for coming. I'll take a few questions, but I also know some of you have class. Should I just pause, Brendan, and let people go? So, okay. If you need to leave or want to pretend you need to leave, go right ahead. Let's go ahead. Are there any questions now? Yes, you.
First of all, thanks. Second, are there other career academic options besides public history programs into this, or is it just like volunteering or?
Sure. Well, so much depends on what field of public history you're interested in. The preparation for, I kind of glossed right over historic preservation. That's a big field. And with the preparation for that is very different than the preparation for the National Park Service, for example. So a public history program is a great way to go. Make sure they have a digital edge or don't go. A lot of public history programs were founded in the 70s and teach public history the way they did in the 1970s, and that's not good. So make sure it has a digital edge, whatever you're interested in. Well, do you think you have an interest?
Right now I want to go into library science and do
Okay.
basic.
Sure. Well, I think an MLS degree is what makes the most sense for you. You probably know this already, most university librarians, rather than having a PhD, they have 2 MAs.
Right.
And one is an MLS, and that's probably the one to do first because that'll get your foot in the door. Maybe you can get a job with that. And the second one could be in history. That could be public history. I think that would be more friendly to it. Absolutely. Yes?
I have two somewhat related questions. First of all, I'm basically a dinosaur and really not very good at digital things.
Mm-hmm.
How do you start teaching yourself how to become involved with that and have a digital presence?
Sure. I have students come to me sometimes. They go, I hate computers. I don't want to use computers. And I said, well, you should get yourself some suspenders and join the Amish then, because that's really your only option in the modern world if you're not going to do this. Let me see if I can go over here and do this again. There's a wonderful ethos. Oh God, I did a Google search. Oh, and it worked. How about that? I did a Yahoo search. There's a wonderful do-it-yourself ethos in digital history. A lot of digital historians like to call themselves hackers, and it's not quite right. But really, there's nobody who's been doing it for a generation. So it's an opening field. This is a website called Digital Research Tools, and you sort of go down and you say, okay, I want to do X. I want to preserve data. I want to publish. I want to record audio and video, and it'll give you a list of tools for doing that. There's YouTube videos galore on this stuff. The trouble is they're unfiltered and the quality is all over the place. But there's a subscription service called Lynda, Lynda. It's a series. Your university may have access to it.
We do.
Okay, very good. And Lynda is how-to videos that are curated, that are good, about how to do anything you can imagine. A good place to start if you want a digital presence might be with WordPress. WordPress is a free web building platform. You can very simply start a blog on it. It has a lot of templates, so you don't have to figure out all the colors and stuff. You can say, oh, that looks good. I'll just take that, and, put it in your cart, and you can build your skills up from there.
Can we just interject quickly? We have a digital humanities minor here.
Okay.
And although the history program is in the College of Humanities, if it's open to anybody on campus. So if you're interested in gaining more digital skills in a sort of related field, the Digit minor might be an interesting place to go.
That sounds like a fantastic thing, and it's something I'm trying to get going at my college to get outside of just the history department. Yeah, you can teach yourself this stuff, but it's so much nicer sometimes starting in a group and getting your feet wet that way. And you will not be the dumb person in the class, I promise you. A lot of people are in your boat. Did you have another question?
I did. So BYU has kind of a special interest and ability to do genealogical research. And I'm wondering, what are the best ways to incorporate genealogy both into more traditional history and public history?
Absolutely. One thing, the digital turn we're having, one thing I didn't have time to say is, I think it's changing the way we can do local history and the way we can research obscure individuals hugely. It is not changing our interpretation of the American Revolution particularly, one way or another, but our understanding of Provo, Utah, or Spokane, Washington is exploding as you're able to go through Google Books and find everybody you wandered through or something. And the same is true with obscure individuals. Ancestry is a fantastic website. Unfortunately, it's all organized about putting together that family tree of yours. Well, I'm not interested. I really don't care who my ancestors were. It's just never interested me. I might be really interested, though, in a con man who came through Spokane in 1910. So you can research those people. It's not all that easy saving your stuff. There's a digital tool I urge you to learn if you're doing research online called Zotero. Zotero is similar to, a couple people are shaking their heads, it's similar to EndNote and stuff like that, but it's much better. And it's free, and you won't lose access to it the day you graduate. So I do urge you to learn Zotero and use that for your research. Other questions? Is anybody here working on a digital project? What are you, in the back, in the red shirt, what are you working in? The plaid?
We're in a digital history class, and we're
Okay.
talking about the LDS sister missionaries and the timeline of where they were coming to go into missions with their husbands, and then they became single sisters, and how an age change happened. And so we're just...
Okay. I'm thinking you have a rich set of resources to work with there that's pretty well documented. How are you going to put it online?
So we're doing the JS timeline, and we've been using Zotero as you suggest.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, Timeline is one of a series of those tools they're very good and usable. JS Timeline is from the Knight Foundation, isn't it? Yeah. The Knight Foundation is a nonprofit that supports newspapers that put together a set of really easy-to-use digital tools that are out there. It can be incorporated into WordPress or whatever. You're good. What are you working on?
I work for something called the Nauvoo Community Project, which is housed in this building through our genealogical research lab. We have a website where we are conducting basic genealogical research on every resident of Nauvoo, Illinois between 1839 and 1846.
Okay. And how are you going to make that available to the public?
It's online right now, and
Is it a database?
It is a website where you can search individual people
Okay.
and we'll take you to the research we have, and we're also connecting it within the next month or so, I believe, to Family Search, so that people who are doing genealogical research through the Family Search website will be made aware of our research as well.
I think that's the future. A lot of this is big websites that kind of suck up all the smaller projects and make them searchable and available all in one place. The Digital Public Library of America being the best example. Anything else? Yeah. Okay, well, I guess I'm going to be back here at 3 if people want to talk longer and bust out the laptops and look at websites or talk about public history careers. I don't know anybody in Provo except Brendan, so I'm here for you. Okay, and Jay.